So I was born in the Bay Area. After a sort of failed attempt to be born at home in Lagunitas, we
Oh,
rushed to the to the San Rafael Hospital where I was born, and I spent about 5, 6 years in California, sort of San Francisco, and then down in Santa Cruz before moving to South Florida.
Oh,
It was a major left turn. My parents actually split for around a year. My mom went back up to upstate New York, and my dad and I were here. My mom was with my brother, and we all sort of reunited in Florida when I was around 6. And I spent the next 15 years or so in South Florida. Very different than San Francisco and the Bay Area, and I had
super
sort of
different.
like
but a little bit
yeah, I was
warmer.
it was, yeah, I mean, the weather's nice. You got a warm ocean. The Everglades are cool. We weren't that far north of Fort Lauderdale and Miami, so
Okay.
those were the sort of cities to relate to. But being honest, like South Florida is not my jam. Like it's just it was sort of like as soon as I had free will, I was sort of out back to the West Coast. It's just a lot more. I don't know. Culturally, this is sort of more fits my vibe,
Hmm.
and so I came back here in 2001, and yeah, I've been here ever since. Before Fyrn, there was sort of a 15-year period where I was actually traveling quite a lot for work and on the road a lot. But for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been just very much sort of settled and in San Francisco full time and building this company with Ross, my partner. And
Yep.
I love it here. I mean, San Francisco is an amazing place. Gets a lot of heat these days, but in general, there's a lot to like about being in the Bay.
It gets heat because of the first thing that came to my mind was basically the homeless issues that the city's struggling with big time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. There was, through COVID, there was like a big exodus of a lot of the folks who came here for tech jobs and didn't really necessarily come to the city because they wanted to live in San Francisco, but more because this is where work was. And
Yeah.
I just felt like publicly there's just a lot of like San Francisco's dead and this place is terrible. And yeah,
Right.
you mentioned that, of course, there is a big homeless epidemic, and I think the city needs to do more to support those folks and for us to sort of figure out how to make it feel a little bit safer and a little bit more of a place that's attractive for people to be. But I also think that there are elements of that also that are just sort of city life is a bit different, and
Yeah.
and I think it's still a beautiful place with lots of creative and amazing people doing great things. And this year in particular, I've just been really focused on like, I want to get back out into the world and be gathering with people that are adjacent to us in work and in life, and hosting dinners again and things that like, things that kind of went away for the last few years in a way that I think it's going to take a lot of intentionality to bring back and to sort of remember the before times.
The before times, yeah, the before times. I think intentionality is an interesting word. It's a good word because it's very easy for people once people went to the work from home mode to just stay in that mode because it's easy to
Yeah.
stay on the couch or stay in that comfort zone. I mean, for sure, the city hasn't come back to what it was, what it was like before the pandemic, but it's still San Francisco. I think people like to say things like, "Oh, the city's dead; it's going to die." I'm like, no, it's not. It's San
It's a
Francisco.
city.
Come
There
on.
is ups
Like,
and downs.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's different though because you mentioned tech, and a lot of those people actually don't need to be in the office. So that is one thing that I think a lot of us are curious about to see what happens if those people are going to be forced or enticed to come back into the city, or they just stay from working from home.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, right? Like, I think we intersect with a lot of folks in the architecture and sort of work planning world that are thinking about that stuff. And I know it intersects with everybody's individual lives as to where and how they want to operate. It's such a personal thing. And I think like one nice part about the pandemic is it kind of opened the door to, there are many different ways for us to be working.
Yeah.
What is the ideal one for each of us as individuals or for companies is a really hard question. And I think I'm really kind of excited to see what evolves from here. Like I think we've broken down some walls and barriers to ideas about how work has to be, and now it'll just be interesting to see how kind of bring new things to life. And my guess is that we're going to see a lot of sort of hybrid situations where people do some work from places that they'd like that are not an office, and other times are wanting to get together for for creativity reasons, or just the interaction and the things that come from. There's something to be said for just sort of mixing it up with folks that you are working with, and all the unknowns that come out of that, the things that you're not planning for or expecting. It's not about, in my mind, like whether you can get the job done. It's about the total experience. And so I think there'll be a lot more onus on sort of the making the workplace a place people want to go, as opposed to a place they have to go.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I wonder if that means that more people would be happier, if they have that flexibility.
Yeah, for sure. The not to talk about remote working for the entire recording, but the other flip side of it too is we were talking to a lot of partners who own architecture offices, and this is not just architecture specific, of course, but they were saying that there comes a point where we have to request or force employees to be back in the office for their own good, even if they don't see it or feel it immediately. And they've had plenty of employees who come back into the office kind of begrudgingly, and after a few weeks they say, oh yeah, this was actually good for me to have some structure to get out of the house and X, Y, and Z. So it'll be a bit of a struggle, but I think you are correct that shaking it up usually produces good results in the end. I'm optimistic.
Yeah, and as it pertains to San Francisco, I'm just a believer in this place. It's in an incredible, spot from a geographic and nature perspective. It's a beautiful city. It's been reborn so many times over its history, and so I tend to believe that we're in for a bit of a renaissance period over the next 5 to 10 years, where we'll see a lot of creativity come back, and that the exodus will lead to a rebirth that'll be really nice. I'm kind of excited about it. I know that there's a lot of anxiety, and I'm sure that the next few years will be rough, but I just sort of believe in this place and the people who really want to be here to make it a special place again. Oh,
that's great. So you're in Florida, and so you went to school for business, right?
Yeah. So, in truth, I sort of had no idea what I wanted to do. As I was a 17-year-old trying to figure out what was next. And
fair.
My parents we moved out there in 84, 85, 86-ish. And my parents, and at the time, plugged into a program that basically froze tuition at that year and board. And so I think I had something like $1,000 a semester, if I stayed in state. And so I just kind of went down the list. It was literally, and then I had a grant. So I was being paid to go to school in Florida, literally getting a check every semester. And I was like, well, I'm going to stay in state. I went to University of Florida. And I think I went down a path of pre-med, that's a lot of volunteering, and I'm not totally sure this is something I want to do, so that's not going to work. Computer science, I have no idea really why, but just it seemed like a thing that was happening at the time, and I very quickly was like, this is definitely not for me. And if I'm being totally honest, I think that I think it was, business and international economics. It was I could get A's in these classes without trying that hard, which meant I could party a lot and have a good time. And that's what I gravitated to. And I think in retrospect, I feel like I, in some ways, kind of wasted the opportunity to learn about a field that would have been more compelling or interesting at that time. And I write it off to youth, and but that was the way that I made that decision. And when I left school, I knew that I didn't really feel so during school. I went on a trip called Semester at Sea. That was sort of a way to get outside of Florida and have an experience. We went on a boat that went around the world to 11 countries, and that was really, I had done a fair amount of traveling growing up, but that was really it's almost like a sample platter for the world. It was with 600 kids, and you got a chance to really see and experience so many different cultures in between ports. We went to Cuba, Brazil, South Africa, Kenya, Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Hong Kong, and Japan.
Wow.
And it was, it's pretty amazing, right? You're stopping for anywhere from 3 to 7 days in a port, and you get off with all these people, and you could go be in the country for that period of time. And in between the ports, they were bringing folks on to, from that place to speak about the country. And it was just an incredible way to kind of open your mind to the world. post school, I was quite certain I didn't want to start working. And so I wanted to get back to traveling, and my dad kind of sat me down and said, hey, and it was kind of ironic because my dad lived abroad for many, many years in a number of countries, but he was like, I think you should at least take a couple interviews for work and see what's going to happen. And so I begrudgingly sort of set up a couple of interviews, one of which was with a company that I went through the whole process of talking about the fact that I felt like if I was going to sit behind a desk or start to sort of do a more corporate job, I'm going to need to travel for, 6-9 months and get that out of my system to know that I could be fully focused. And they went for that. And so I had like a 9-month period in 2001 that I traveled around the world and again came back to work in San Francisco. And that was during the .com crash. So most people were getting phone calls that were sort of like, hey, you don't have a job to come back to. I had chosen to go into restructuring and the sort of operational turnaround of businesses. And so I was getting a phone call that was, can you get back here sooner? We'd love for you to start because there's a lot of businesses failing and we need more resources. And it was a very strange thing, but I got this opportunity to sort of see the world again, and make those choices. And that was very formative.
That's incredible. The going back real quick to the semester at sea, I guess you'd call it a study abroad program, or that program is something I had not ever heard about until very recently. Actually, just a few weeks ago, I was talking to a friend of ours, and he had also did the same thing, and I was blown away by it. I was blown away by how many countries you visited, and because usually, in the case of our experience, when people study abroad, you choose one place, and you go to that one place for an extended period of time. And if it's in Europe, then obviously you travel to other areas, but getting to see the various countries that you listed is most people don't have. It'll change as time goes on, but most people don't have that opportunity to go to all those places. For sure not. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly fortunate. I mean, the way it happened was I went to the study abroad office. I knew that I wanted to go abroad somewhere, and I had exactly what you described. I was thinking, where should I spend a semester? And I've got some Italian heritage. Maybe I'll go to Italy. I don't know. I really didn't have a strong sense of where, and I just saw a poster on the wall. And I was like, is this a real thing? Like this feels like something made up.
Yeah.
And there was a movie at the time. This is kind of silly to tell the story, but there was a movie called White Squall that was like a Jeff Bridges coming of age. These young guys go on a boat. It was like a large scale sailboat that traveled around. And I don't know, the romance of being on a boat going around the world to see countries seemed incredible. And so, it really just came down to like, could we afford it? And we got some financial aid, and I was able to do this experience. I was supposed to go with one of my best friends at school, and he dropped out at the last moment. So maybe a blessing in a way that I kind of went totally unencumbered. I knew no one. And to this day, my greatest friends in the world come out of that experience. There's a few guys that we're very, very tight with, and then each of them have introduced each other to people within their worlds, from before the ship, and it's just sort of became an incredibly a big foundational experience to sort of who is my community and the people that I care, and spend the most time with today. And you're right, like it's. We knew it was the kind of experience that you knew in the moment how unique it was, and in every way, in like the exposure to the places, the opportunity to to be at sea for that period, the friendships that were made, the education, and what it kind of inspired you to then, that shapes who you are, and it sort of shapes the way that you think about going out into the world thereafter. I don't know what it would have been like to spend 4 or 5 months in one place, but I felt like that experience was one of the more important decisions I've sort of ever made.
And you said it was 600 students all on one ship?
Yeah, so it's like it's actually about 1,000 people. So there's 600 students, and there was an elderly population that came on, and so you were kind of paired. If you wanted to be, you kind of were paired with like a pseudo grandparent who
That's sweet.
And those were folks who just like they wanted to be around young people and have this kind of similar experience. And then there was the teachers, many of which were on the whole time, and some of which were temporary, who came in from a country and would speak to the whole to the whole boat or work with classes. And then, and then there was staff, and we found out as we boarded the boat, if you all remember, MTV Road Rules was actually on the boat while this experience was happening. So that was a whole like circus that was also happening. I mean, there was a lot of, in addition to the amazing experience and education, there was a lot of partying happening, of course. And I mean, it was just magical. Like I talk, everyone I speak to who's sort of like thinking about studying abroad, I'm always sort of encouraging them to look at that program, because I think it's so unique.
I would for sure say so. Like, we've both studied abroad.
I might look into it right after this.
I know, I was going to say, that's going to be us in 30 years. We're going to be one of the elderly people on the boat. Let's go party.
I'm with you. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's learn some stuff and party.
But so after all of this traveling, did you really feel like coming back to live in the States, or like you are not tempted to just move somewhere else?
That's a great question. I often wonder, like, if I didn't have a sort of job that was waiting for me, maybe I would have felt less inclined or tethered. I mean, I don't know. I think at the time it just sort of felt like, well, this is the path that I'm going to take after this traveling, and I wanted to come back, and I wanted to live in San Francisco. I wanted to sort of have an experience. I don't know. To be honest, like, as I look back, it felt in some ways very intentional to make the choices I did to do the traveling. And in some ways, like, you get kind of swept up in this, like, I'm going to go to college, and then I'm going to get a job, and then I'm going to see what that's all about. And for the first many years of my work, by a series of circumstances that were both fortunate and a little bit out of my control, I ended up working with folks who were, I don't know, just incredibly overqualified relative to me to do the kind of work that we were doing. And so I got a really amazing education in that world. But I always had this feeling of, like, I don't know if this is me or what I want to do, or if this is my thing long term, right? I just had that, like, and so I used the experience. I mean, I was in a position of where I was traveling 2 companies for 1 to 3 year periods. And some of those companies were in places like Washington, D.C., but I'm living in San Francisco. And so when it came to the weekend, it was just as easy to travel somewhere else as it was to travel back to San Francisco. And so I used that as another platform to experience different places in the country, to travel outside the country on the weekends or extended times. And in between each one of these companies I worked with for 1 to 3 years, I would take 6 to 12 weeks off and again, kind of like go out and see the world. That was something I was very lucky to be in the position to do it. To go to your question, I think I always have wanted to live outside the country, and now even more than ever, it feels like something I'd really like to do. But it just never happened. And, in a way where I sort of planted myself somewhere. My wife, who lived abroad and is an artist, like, she's very much of the mentality, like, let's go to a place and let's really experience it and feel it and get to know the people. And she's moved me further along on that path versus the, like, frenetic, I'm going everywhere, seeing everything all the time. It's a little bit of balance that I think I need, because I definitely sway towards the frenetic side.
Well, I think it is interesting that with all of the sampling of different places, that you had this pull back towards San Francisco, because if I heard correctly, you had only been in San Francisco until you were 6. Is that right? So like a pretty young age, and yet there was something about the place that had a magnetic pull on you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true, right? Like, I don't know that those young years, I mean, I guess like subconsciously they must have had an impact. And then my dad's brother's family was still out here, and I did some visiting. There was sort of a romance to San Francisco that I felt like a pull. I think I when it came to getting done with school, what I knew was New York or San Francisco. Those were the 2 places that felt interesting to me as like in the country.
Let me ask, why not Los Angeles?
I was gonna ask.
I don't know, honestly. Like, I think I didn't have a lot of time spent in Los Angeles, and it didn't there was the guy that I traveled a lot with, is a writer and a showrunner in LA. And there was times where while we were traveling together, we're like, we're banging out scripts and thinking about stories. And there was a moment where it was like, oh, maybe this is a thing we would do. And he went and did it, which is rad. I love that. But LA was never part of my consideration set, and I don't have a strong reason for why. I think I always have been drawn to New York because of the density, and it's just it's an incredibly unique place that has an energy that's hard to match. I've always loved that and been drawn to it. And San Francisco, I think, had these family roots, and I grew up hearing stories of my dad, and his crew were sort of hippies that lived abroad in India and Nepal and Kashmir and Morocco, and then came back here, and they had a dinner music venue in Nicasio called Rancho Nicasio, which is where my folks met. Total failure as a business, but incredibly as you hear the stories, you're like, oh, this is kind of an amazing place that's magical. And so still to this day, I sort of as I'm going out to Tamales Bay, or you're driving out to these beautiful natural places, I stop in Little Nicasio and I see the church where they were married a few days before I was born. And I go into the rancho and have a beer at the bar. And I think about what my young parents, were like at that time. And I think probably that pull, that sort of subconscious pull of this is a place where people that I'm from came from. It just drew me to it.
So the first gig you got in San Francisco was a company that helped with the restructuring of other offices. And so how many different jobs did you have? What was the path that you went, I guess, down before Fyrn?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of those where I just kind of got swept up in the path in some ways. I came to San Francisco after I did a couple of those interviews, and one was with a big, if you remember or there was this sort of big five accounting firms and consulting firms, one of which was a company called Arthur Andersen. They had 80,000 employees. I was interviewing for a corporate finance job.
That sounds like the antithesis of everything of your story so far, I have to say.
True, barely knowing what corporate finance was, in some sense. And I say that not that I didn't understand the concept, but I showed up and for my interview, and a woman came out and said, "Hey, would you also like to interview for corporate restructuring?" Which I absolutely had no idea what that was at the time. Sure. And I'm sitting in this lobby, and in my young years in San Francisco, Joe Montana was, a mythical hero as a football player. And I wasn't even that into football, but he just had a presence, and he became someone who I liked when I liked the 49ers. And there he was sitting next to me in the office. I looked over and I was like, oh my God, this is so weird. Maybe this is meant to be that I should be sitting here. And I know that sounds silly, but that's what came to mind. So
why was he in the office?
Yeah, so I was I looked over and I was like, no way, that's actually Joe Montana. And I'm I've flown in from Florida for my interview, and so I go over and I say, hey, what are you doing here? And I'm a big fan, and and he has these gigantic hands. And he shakes my hand. And he goes, "I'm getting my taxes done." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds thrilling," But I'm a big fan, and it was nice to meet Joe. I said, yes, I'll do both these interview paths. And I spent the next 2 days kind of learning what those two things were and asking a lot of questions and doing my, ridiculous thing to sort of tell them that, hey, I'm going to need this time to travel before I'm going to feel comfortable, thinking absolutely that I'm sabotaging this interview and there's no way they're going to offer me a job. And I don't know. It just sort of this is just privileged. I got lucky stuff, right? Basically, I had a good rapport with all the folks through the interview process. It turned out restructuring was you travel to companies that are challenged and that are needing to sort of, be fixed in some capacity, or finance, you sit behind the desk and you try to make as much money as you can behind a computer screen. And I was like, well, I'm interested in let's go to the companies and let's have these experiences and see what it's about. That's the one. A couple of days later, I got the call from the sort of head of the restructuring practice who said, hey, so I hear you don't want to start for, 6 to 9 months. I'm happy to have you start, in 9 months. No problem. Wow. Just choose a start date and talk to HR. And I said, oh my God, I guess I should give this a shot. And so I went off and I did that traveling, and I was getting these phone calls. Can you come back earlier in Thailand? And I was like, nope, I don't think I can. And so then I came back. I mean, totally like just ridiculous now that I think about it, but this is true. This is how it went. And so I came back, and it was the middle of the dot-com crash in San Francisco. I went to my training, and within a few months, the Enron scandal happened, and Arthur Andersen, this 80,000 person company, is dissolving. And everyone's losing their job. I remember the New York Times was printing full page ads were being printed with the names of all 80,000 people that were losing their jobs. And a company called Alvarez & Marsal, which at the time was this boutique sort of cream of the crop restructuring operational turnaround company, had 25 people. They bought 3 groups, San Francisco, Atlanta, and Chicago, and they didn't even take everyone. They took about half the people from a number of these offices, and somehow my boss took the 5 most senior people of the 12-person group and me, little 6-month, no experience guy. And so here I was suddenly working with all these folks with, MBAs from Ivy League schools and 10 plus years work experience, going into these companies and helping, sort of turn them around when they were in distress. And so I cut my teeth learning under, these folks, and the company went from 50 to 2,000 people between the time that I started and the time that I left. And I went from the most junior little analyst, to a managing director who, got all this experience. Sort of what happened was I met a woman a few years into this, and we worked actually in the early days of Lululemon. They were thinking about how to move from Canada, where they had about 50 stores, to the United States, where they wanted to, greatly expand the business. And we were kind of lucky to get exposure to that company at a time when they were sort of putting together that expansion strategy and looking for support in how they would fund and go to market with that. And in doing that, we kind of got exposure to this retail apparel, multi-channel retail apparel business. And within our company, there was a lot of specialization around the financial stuff, the operational stuff, but not necessarily within a vertical, like we're going to do retail apparel or we're going to do multi-channel retail. And so she and I then spent the next 10 years or so, and amongst other people, but I worked with her pretty consistently for that time, focused really specifically in that vertical and became experts. And that gave us an opportunity to go outside the finance and even the operations into marketing and merchandising and all the things outside of really product design. Sorry, I'm going a little long here, but basically, I got to a place where we made a decision to sort of, leave Alvarez & Marsal, and was considering sort of doing some of that same work in a different capacity with her. And instead, I was about to have my daughter, actually. And I kind of looked around and thought, this is a different version of a thing that for a long time, while it's been good work and I've learned an incredible amount, it's been very different than sort of leaning into something that that I'm building, that I believe in from the ground up. And I had a real moment where I kind of sat down and thought, like, I'm about to have a baby. One, I want to be like, my wife and I had always talked about, like, I'm not going to be doing traveling when we have a family. Like, that's not the way that we'd like to raise our kids and how we'd like to sort of start a family. But also I was just sort of thinking to myself, like, okay, how do I explain what I do and why I do it to my kid that I don't have yet? And that lens sort of opened my mind to, I really want to figure out something that that's really easy to explain why I do it and what it is. And in that period of time, I took off some time around the birth of Fiona, and that's when I met Ross, who's a partner today at Fyrn, and my wife went to graduate school, art school, with his brother-in-law. I was cruising down 24th Street in the Mission, and I see this guy, Mick, and I was like, hey, man, what's going on in your studio? Like, take me down there. And so we cruised down to see his art, and on his screen is a prototype of the sort of quintessential Fyrn product, the chair, at the heart of what we do, at the heart of the system. Ross had been working on this for a number of years, and I said, "What's that?" It looked so distinct to me, like the brackets really stuck out. And he said, "Oh, my brother-in-law's been working on this for a long time." And I said, he's looking to turn this into a bigger business, and he's actually in the process of figuring out how to do that. And I said, well, I'd love to meet him. And that's kind of how I got to meet Ross down at
walking down the street.
Man. It's like that poster on the wall, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Just random.
Yeah.
So we're obviously, of course, we're going to dive into Fyrn, but I do want to know, because we've had a lot of guests on the show, and there's some people's life's paths are very structured, which is fine, and other people's life's paths are less structured. And I don't know if you have the answer to this, but I'm very curious if you have a sense as to why, when you applied to the position of the restructuring office, and then it was bought out, and then they acquired, I guess, a few companies, and they got the 5 head partners or the senior folks and yourself. Like, how was it that at those transitions that the people across from you at the table thought, I want Dave? Like, you know, what is the magic? What is the secret sauce? If you have an idea of what it is.
Man, that's such an interesting question, and I've thought a lot about it over the years, right? And I mean, I want to answer it directly, but I also want to just open the door to. I guess I want to like acknowledge the sliding door aspect of that, right? Like, what if they hadn't wanted Dave, and how different might my life be? Like, maybe that would have been my last moment in that world. I would have gone some other direction entirely, right? I've thought about it a lot, and I don't think about it from like I wish it wouldn't have happened that way. I just think a lot about like what a strange outcome that ended up being, and how much it may be shaped for my life. The special sauce or the why.
Yeah.
Honestly, like this is such a strange thing to sort of like reflect on and speak about openly, because I've thought about that a lot too. I don't have a perfect answer for you, and I feel almost in the moments of explaining it, I feel self-conscious about like how is that going to sound to like say out loud some of these things, but I'll just do it because like I don't know how else to answer. Like I feel like one, I just got incredibly lucky, right? Like I don't know how to explain it other than I had a iconoclastic background and approach for being in the job that I was, right? Like I was authentic to who I was, and that like I didn't hide my true personality inside a business setting. I didn't act like somebody who was the first few months on the job. Like I worked incredibly hard. I think I was fairly intelligent and good at what I was doing, but that's not, I don't think it was the work itself that got me that situation. I think there was something about my narrative, my sort of story being a bit different, my personality, whatever energy I was bringing to the office that caught the attention of. I think this was a decision largely made by the lead partner, the guy who gave me that 9 months to begin with. I think a piece of it might have been that he was a real. I think there's like I'm being very binary here. I know this is a continuum, but there's people who are book smart, there's people who are street smart. There's people who have the Ivy League, Harvard, MBA, and went to Stanford. There's folks who sort of went to that state school and carved their way a little bit differently. He was in the latter camp, and I think he saw something in me that was sort of like, oh, here's a kid who's not taken the traditional path to this place. Not that it's wildly different, but I if I had to guess, I would guess that was a component to me getting sort of lucky and being included in that group at that time.
Gotcha. I thought maybe sense. It was your Florida glow that they wanted to keep around. I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
You see the chair on a computer screen or whatever it was. What happens next?
Yeah, so I said, Mick, I'd love to meet Ross. Like I had just been sort of in this place of I'm thinking about what I want to do next. I'm open to the world, showing me a path that is totally outside of something that I could dream up on my own. But I was in that state of mind at the moment, and just sort of had that openness. And he said, yeah, let me make an introduction. And Ross and I met at Psych Glass in the Mission here, and we got our coffees and we sat on the bench outside and we just started talking. Ross is a really humble, soft-spoken, guy. I think I think he was very skeptical. I think it's really hard. What he was looking for, I think, is really hard to find. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think, as I think back, he wanted someone who had a skill set that was very different than his, and made it, was sort of going to be a synergistic partner in the sense that that they could have knowledge about the business side and sort of make it possible for us to have a go at turning this into a real company. And but also I think he was looking for somebody who shared a belief system and wasn't entirely about just this is being built to make as much profit and grow as quickly as possible and make products that are going to sell the most as soon as they can, which in a lot of ways is a lot of businesses are structured around that, right? And I was coming from this place where in the mass production of products, today's world, there's a lot of choices being made where everything's kind of almost made to break. It's made to not last that long. I was just personally in a place of man, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of it in my personal life. I'm tired of sitting in meetings where it's, how do we take a sweater from 12 washes to 9? It's just,
Wait, really?
It's just sort of, yeah. How do we value engineer or take the quality out enough that we can get the costs right. And if they're going to repurchase shortly thereafter, that's good. Right. That's real. And
what do they call it? Designed obsolescence, I think is the term.
Planned obsolescence. Yeah. Exactly. So, we all feel it, right? We feel that feeling in the way that things that used to be wood or glass or metal are now plastic. We feel it when we sort of do all the online research, but can't get a thing that actually lives up to our expectations. And I was really feeling that at the time. And I was really interested in sort of doing something again that I would be excited about and that I could believe in and, and sort of talk to my kids about in a way that that felt real. And then I met Ross, and Ross is just such a unique person. We sat down, and yes, he had, built the foundation for this system, the STEM system, which, was really answering a handful of questions that came to him through his life experience, which, I'll talk all about here. But I just instantly was sort of drawn to him as a person who really had methodically, in a lot of ways, similarly made a bunch of choices that were about wanting to see something come into the world that was different. And Ross, he's a 4th generation craftsman and builder. He literally has had a workshop at his fingertips since he was 0, the day he was born. His grandfather led production for what is the oldest American chair company called the Hitchcock Chair Company when it was reviving in the 1930s. And why I bring that up, I guess, in this context was Ross was thinking about how do we build products that could sort of last forever, right? That truly could be built for easy repair or refurbishment, that would allow for people to get sort of access to high-end craftsmanship, but at scale. And that's really hard to do, right? To build things at the level that you do that's on a custom level, but then make it possible for others to access that. And part of his desire, as he told me his story, was coming from this place of he was doing, work that he would never turn his nose at. It was ultra luxury cabinetry and custom furniture, projects with no budget, projects with no timeline, where, I think when he tells the story, he talks about a $30,000 mail slot as a way to think about the budgets around some of these projects that were ultimately leading to a couple of people inside an incredible home that may or may not last for a long time, because if it sells, someone else might come in and tear it down and start over or totally change it. And he had a vision for how you could sort of really improve the way that, and this is what I think is special when you think about the full holistic design around the way that materials are sourced, the way that they're utilized to produce things, the way that those products then transport, the way that they're serviced after they're out in the world, that they have an opportunity for a second and a third life and become fully circular. And somehow he kind of shared a lot of that in the early conversation, this sort of vision. And I made it past the first gates to where he was like, why don't you come back to the workshop, which was a few blocks away, and I'll show you some of the prototypes and the early pieces that were being built. And when he did that, I got a chance to come in and sort of see firsthand. It was what this was about, and the product itself, or the furniture itself. And I was just really taken by the pieces, right? They were beautiful and it was unique. And when paired with that story, it was inspiring. It was sort of like, wow, this has the bones for something that represents all these qualities that I'm excited and interested in right now. And we took things very slow. Like, we spent, I don't know, 3-4 months kind of dating before we got married, making sure that we knew who each other were, that we understood where we wanted to go with this. And, it was kind of a special time. It was just sort of riding my bicycle down to that workshop a handful of blocks away, and getting to know Ross and getting to figure out, like, how would we bring this to the world if Fyrn was going to, be something that we partnered in. And that's how it came to be.
So at that time when you guys were dating,
yeah.
How large was Fyrn? Like, how many people were there? How many different furniture pieces were made? Like, what was the operation like?
Yeah, so there was a single room in a building that's actually the oldest artist residency building in the city. It's down in the Mission, and upstairs are folks who are sort of live-in artists, and there's other wood shops. There's a theater company that was there. Ross had his workshop that he had been doing the custom cabinetry and furniture in. At the time, he had been working with a guy named Derek, who had been working with him pre-Fyrn, and had helped to sort of go through the early stages of prototyping and iterating on those and breaking things to sort of get to what became the ultimate chair and the bones of the system. And there was a machinist whose name was Dan, who was helping with the metalwork and sort of bringing to life the bracketry that you now see.
Is that the stem?
The stem bracket, right. Yeah, we call it the stem system and that bracket. So Ross was at a place where he had, I'll just sort of give you a little bit of the history that leads up to this moment. So he and Derek, at some point decided, look, like, we're going to put all our energy into trying to bring to life this idea, this system. And Ross naively thought, oh, this will take about 6 months, and I'll have a prototype with this, with these metal connectors and these long lineal lengths of wood, and it shouldn't be that hard. It turned out 6 months turned into a few years of working on that, and and I think we're on this is sort of moving from the brackets being crude equal length flanges to what is now a very delicate and intricate piece, and it's the 50th iteration. But a lot of that, it was just like breaking stuff, right? It was literally like, okay, we have a connection. Let's see how much weight we can put on it. Let's throw the chair across the room. Let's I mean, literally, right? Like, and if you know Ross, you know that he never thinks of anything as a singular activity. He's thinking about the big picture. So he wasn't obsessed with making chairs. He just knew that the engineering was the hardest on a chair. And so he started there, and he knew that if he could do the chair properly, that could extend to lots of other products that utilized a similar system of hardware. And there were other choices, like, it's by design that these long lineal lengths of wood that can stack well, that allow you to have many, many, many components in small spaces and work with them in an efficient manner, and have the yield of that wood be upwards of 90% instead of more like 50 or 60, where a lot of woodworking ends up. And so, if you scaled that wood up to a larger scale, then it would be easier to make it connect with the metal. But he wanted to keep that sort of elegance and the thin frames. And so, that 3-year period led to a place where you ended up with a chair that ultimately is very, very similar to what we have in the world today. And at that point, Ross and Derek were faced with a couple questions. So, how do we know that these chairs are going to last for decades or generations, right? Like, you can't, you can build it well, but you can't know that without time passing. And so, Ross had a couple of friends who were in the restaurant world, and he thought, restaurants take incredible. They have incredible high traffic. There's tons of abuse, all different size people. Hours and hours of moving around and shifting and weight. And so it got some of the early functional prototypes into a place called Shakewell in Oakland, which is still there, and those chairs still exist in that space, as well as a place called the Tradesman right around the corner from the shop, which is now True Laurel today. And the goal was, hey, we're going to stop in on these every month or two. We're going to make sure that I'll stop with the clicking. We're going to make sure that sorry. We're going to make sure that they're holding up and that we can learn anything that needs to be learned, and we can make small iterations. And that was super valuable. Not only did it give us an opportunity to sort of observe how they did under the duress of a high traffic environment, but a couple other things happened, which is people started, this is before there was even a website really, people started turning over the chair and figuring out where it was being made and asking if they could get them for their homes or for other projects. They were sort of immediately attractive to the folks who were sitting on them in the restaurants.
I did that actually.
It's true. Yeah.
I love that.
Look at this metal detail.
We went to the restaurant Piccino in Dog Patch, and I was like, hey man, those tours are really cool. Like maybe we could use that for some project. I just kept looking around like, who makes those? Who makes this? So well done.
I love that. So, and that was, for me, that was a real aha moment when I was getting to know Ross and he was sort of telling me that story. So at that point, Ross was basically, he had those two restaurants happening and because of his past work, he had lots of folks in the architecture and design community that he knew. And there was really just like some word of mouth sales coming in. And he got to a place where he had to like stop and say, okay, I have to figure out how I'm going to sort of support the growth of this business and have this turn into, what I want to see it become. And really, when I think about that question of what you want to see it become, it was about growth for impact. It was about producing products in a way that were a better alternative than what was out there, and that sort of brought this craftsmanship to a larger audience. It wasn't about like, how do I have the biggest company in the world, but how do I sort of set an example for a physical, tangible example of a product that lives up to these principles that we believe are important. And it was in that period he had sort of shut down the shop. He was looking for somebody. Derek and Dan and Ross were the three people who had been developing the product and the system to that point. And that's when I met him. And that's when we kind of like took about a 6-month period where we thought about like, okay, how are we going to bring a website to life and start to introduce this into the world. I think we did West Coast Craft was like the first, was like right around that time we launched a website and we brought the stuff to West Coast Craft. And that's when, Fyrn had a public presence. This is 2016 for the first time. And from there, we've taken a lot of turns, but ultimately that was when we started, going out into the world. And we utilized, one of the things that really caught my attention was this notion that, look, in beautifully designed public spaces, when people are sitting on the furniture, they're really, taken by it enough to then be reaching out organically to ask for it for their homes or for their projects. And so that became a real sort of core component to our strategy, which was we don't really have a lot of dollars to sort of pepper the world with digital marketing or to open big showrooms, but we can go to architects and designers who immediately see how unique this product is and most of them sort of love it when they put their hands on it. Let's just put as many of their hands as we can on the furniture, and let's show up in these places that are incredibly well designed and beautiful as a means for people to discover the furniture. And that's been very successful in the Bay Area, is in that, we're really sort of spreading our wings here in this market. But it's almost like we're a little bit of a secret. It's only been very recently that we've been trying to sort of bring Fyrn out to other markets and other countries, and to really show our presence as a design and build company that's doing what we've been doing in the Bay Area for a long time, in other places.
So during that 6 months period, were you guys producing chairs, or all that was put on hold to try and figure out the strategy?
Not really. We were really on hold for the most part.
Interesting.
So we just, there was a good portion of time where no one was really producing much. We were sort of just figuring out like, what is our plan here? How are we going to execute it? How are we going to move forward? Derek and Dan had taken, were actually not there during a good portion of that period. It was just sort of me and Ross in the shop. And then we slowly started to bring those guys back, and then we started to hire people. And, and a big portion of the transition from that phase, that stage to where we were producing on a more consistent basis, these guys, and some of this had already happened, but if you think about Ross and Derek, Ross is a 4th generation craftsman. He's been decades of sort of understanding how to work with wood and how to bring the, high craft to this system. Derek is a craftsman as well, but it's hard to find a lot of those people, and a lot of those people who want to step in and do this particular thing and produce the same thing, repeatedly, right? Because we are producing products at scale. It's not a custom or a new thing each time. Yeah. And so the next stage after sort of the first many hundreds of these were built was, well, how do we move to these processes being repeatable, easier, faster, repeatable, and trainable? And this is where, like, I just think Ross is a savant. Like, he is just, he's not an industrial engineer by schooling. He never went to college. He just was somebody who, like, when I need to solve a problem, I figure out the best way to do it, and I iterate until it's been solved. And so if you come to our shop, or you come to now the new facility in Sparks, where we're building furniture, there's what we call the green machines. There's 30 plus machines that are either modified off the shelf hardware or built from the ground up to do these processes that are germane to the furniture. And they are allowing for sort of like that craft to be done repeatedly over and over again in a way that a craftsman would do it in a much more, manual way. But we've now built these machines that will allow us to sort of repeat that process over and over again and train somebody who's not, who doesn't have decades of experience. And so those machines are at the core of our system and the ability to be producing furniture with that same level of craft at scale.
So it was not a case of, we have this finely crafted, detailed, sophisticated thing, let's shop it out to X companies who claim they can produce it at scale with their own methods and whatever kind of thing they do to make it happen. It was then the opposite of modifying or creating your own machinery to have it be done.
Yeah, and I mean,
that's wild.
Therein lies what's special, and also what makes what we're doing so hard, right?
Yeah,
and it is
sure.
Truly hard. I think you're hitting on the groove or the path or the that most things that come into the world in the furniture world like take, right? Which is, it's a lot of people can design a piece of furniture or an idea, and then they exactly like you said, they shop it out, and inevitably where that lands, for the most part, and not everywhere, if you want to produce it more than once, is overseas somewhere where you can be produced relatively inexpensively. You sort of go down that funnel of, well, what's the cheapest materials that we can use to do this? And, now I'm dealing with transportation and port challenges, and where do I warehouse it, and how do I move this big thing, and can I ever fix it? And all of those are the reason why the furniture industry just hasn't changed that much, right? And so at the heart of what Ross's vision was and what we're trying to build is a completely different way to think about how you build and design and produce and distribute products. And I think what I get most excited about in that is more and more now we have industrial design students, and we're touring folks who are now at the stage of thinking about how to produce products in the world, and we're creating a groove, and I think amongst others, and sort of, here's a different way that you can think about this. If you use the innovation and what's available to you in modern times, there's alternatives to the path that you just described. And I think more and more folks are taking them. And I think that means, we're going to see more and more great solutions.
Mm-hmm. It just takes a shit ton of work.
It does. Yeah, it does.
I also wanted to know maybe more on the business development side. So during that 6-month period and whenever other time you guys were developing the green machines, or however you called it, and all these things, how does how does money work? Do you have to fundraise to support all these endeavors to then produce this factory line and then the product and everything else? Because I mean, I don't know what everyone's backgrounds are, but time is money, and that's a lot of time and energy to be spending for something you hope to work out.
Yeah. That's a big part of the challenges that we've been facing over, from the beginning and still today. It's almost crazy to try to build a manufacturing company in San Francisco, right? Like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that seem kind of like oppositional, which makes it cool, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think those constraints bled a lot of the creativity. They led to like why so many things are unique about the way that this has been built. Whether it be space constraints or money constraints or people constraints, it forced a lot of choices that ultimately kind of like were aligned with the vision, but also were just a necessity. They just, it might have been done differently had we been in a different resource position. And so, Ross and I self-funded a lot of the early periods of the company. And then the business kind of got to a place where maybe naively, we probably should have, frankly, raised some more capital earlier. But we got to a place where the business was self-sustaining within San Francisco. We expanded into a couple of additional spaces within that building. But we started to run up against the challenges of, look, we're capacity constrained now. There's more demand than there is for the space. We also have no ability to bring all these new products, which include, prototypes for tables or shelving or lounge seating or, lighting. Like, we have all these cool things that we just can't do inside this space. The only way to kind of take the next steps. And at this point, there's zero marketing department. There's really no sales department. Like I'm partially the sales department and partially the marketing department and so, we were doing a lot for what we had from a resource perspective, but we were always in this place of, we're not ever doing anything good enough or to the level or the standard that we believe we should be able to. And that's really frustrating and challenging. And so we went out a few years ago and, right about the end of 2019, early 2020, we made the decision that we're gonna change the way that we're doing this. Right, wonderful timing. Yeah. And so COVID happens right at the time that we were sort of raising our first capital to start to think about expansion in a different way of doing this from both a capital perspective and a production perspective. And we had not yet raised the capital when COVID happened. We were faced with, San Francisco shut down. It was sort of a question of, we had to make a decision. We spent a number of weeks going, hey, do we just let everyone who's here go and just, batten down the hatches until we understand what this is or what's going to happen? Right. At that time, a large portion of our business was being driven by, common areas and cafes and offices, restaurants, hospitality environments. We had a residential business, but it was 30% or so. And so instantly it was zero on the commercial side of the world. Yeah. It was just like, no one's doing anything. We actually kind of looked at each other and said, look, like the system was conceived to be a residential system. That is where we know that people love having this furniture in their homes. Let's lean into that and let's not let everyone go. Let's try to weather this. And we were able to do that for about a year. Everything shifted. We actually, the residential business did very, very well. That's where our focus went. We were able to raise a bit of money during that stretch. Not a lot, but what I'll call sort of the bare minimum to put a plan in place to open a new facility. We started in San Francisco, but at that time, like with everything that was going on here from a commercial real estate perspective, like building in San Francisco was fairly impossible. It didn't make much sense. We knew that we wanted to stay close to here. We also knew that Ross was going to need to be wherever this facility was, and where he had a kid, and he actually is a little bit of a tangent, but he built a studio under his sister's home, not far from the shop, but it's 600 square feet. And he now had a family, and he was going, I need a little bit more space. Not that they couldn't make it work, but so he and I started looking for where should we be. We wanted to retain some of the vendor base in the Bay Area and be close enough that, you know, our presence here would not go away. And we landed on Reno, or Sparks is where the facility was. But that market was kind of hot, and it was hard to find the right spot. And so we finally got our facility. And it looked like we were kind of, you know, when we raised that money and when we were committing to the facility about 18 months ago, it sort of looked like, hey, we're on the wind down of COVID. And then the Corona variant, I think, was the variant kind of hit in the early part of last year. And I will say up to that point, we had done a really nice job of weathering this whole thing because of everyone was struggling because like international shipping was locked down. Yeah. You couldn't get raw materials. We were actually doing okay because we had a very tight domestic vendor base on raw materials. We use very simple raw materials, which we were able to get our hands on still. But when that second wave happened at the beginning of last year, everything got really, really hard. You know, we suddenly had a number of shutdowns because of COVID, you know, on our teams. Our supply chains got really, really challenged. Costs were rising. The timeline to get that facility up and running just kept getting extended. So now, you know, Ross has moved to Reno. He's building a team out there. We're still producing everything in San Francisco, but we don't have some of our best people on site to do that. So we're sort of training those new people here to maintain it while the new facility is being built. And so now you're running two facilities in an inefficient time where everything's hard. It's just, it's expensive. It's really, really challenging. And so, you know, we went through some of the capital that we raised quicker and we still weren't at where we needed to be. That's when it takes us up to the end of last year where we needed to raise a little bit more capital to sort of bring this to life. But right at the time that, you know, interest rates are spiking and inflation is off the charts and nobody's opening their wallets during that time. And so we had to make some tough choices here at the beginning of this year to kind of contract, to digest the growth of that facility, get ourselves to a place where we can start to turn again towards a place where we can go, okay, the business is stabilized and manage this new facility being in place. We will likely go to market with the need to get a little bit more capital in the future, but not right now at a time where it's just so challenged. And so we've just slowed down certain things, like when the new products are going to come to market, how aggressively are we going to sort of, market what we're doing. And we're trying to stabilize where we're at and survive. Basically, I mean, to be perfectly frank, survive this year that is so challenging for this industry and the world at large. Yep. I believe there's huge opportunity for us to be successful on the other side of that. I believe that a lot of the companies that are sort of producing, generic products that don't have a strong reason to exist won't be here, but I hope that we will be, and that we get an opportunity to sort of bring this vision to life, in the coming years. Well, I hope so too. And I know we both hope so for sure. And I think it will happen. And that's just based on, I would agree and believe in what you said, I think very early on in the conversation about people, or yourself actually in your own story, getting tired of being around products and things that are just built poorly and are crappy. And I think a lot of people are warming up to that idea and becoming much more aware of it and just kind of tired of it too. And I think it's just tied to a larger understanding of the environment and waste and all kinds of things that are kind of coming more to the forefront of people's thinking. But it is a particularly challenging time. But I think not if, but when you guys get through it, it'll be fine. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah, I feel like it should be there. I feel like there's a importance to what we're doing, and I think there's a reason for it to exist. But it's you just sort of you take it one day at a time. This is the experience that we're in right now. There's things we can't control. There's also lots of things we can, and I think I hope that we're able to sort of just keep going, and get through what is absolutely challenging, and not just for us, for lots of our partners and for lots of the the individuals. And so I think we will. I think we will too. And I'm confident that we're doing the things that we should be to get there. So that's all you can do, right? Is do your best each day.
Yeah, for sure. And anyone listening, go check out their stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and the price point of your products is incredible. Like, again, for the quality, the design, like stop shopping at IKEA, people. Like, actually buy these things. Like, like it's just so much better.
But it is actually a very, very reasonably priced for that kind of product. When I first heard the price, I was shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I think I appreciate that, and I think that the folks who understand and live in a world of well-designed products or custom products or really well, crafted things with beautiful materials understand how big that range can be. Mm-hmm. But there is also the reality that, like, for a lot of people, what we make is not affordable, or they can't reach it. And, and we try to do things like we have the annex where you can buy things that have, been out in the world before, or that are, that are seconds, but it is an investment. And I think for me, I think really hard about, are you interested in making an investment in something that you'll have for quite some time, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a different mentality than just like, okay, I'm solving my need right now. I don't really care what happens, in a year or two or three. And I think you're right. I think there's a shift. I think more and more people are thinking that way. And I think our goal would be to continue to figure out ways to make what we do more and more accessible to more and more people. Because it's nice to live with really nice things, right? Like, it's nice. It's nice to have a story behind a product and know that, hey, somebody handed this down to me, or it existed here before in this way. So, I hope we can be a part of that.
It reminds me of the classic Eames chair. The molded one, right? Not like the super cool lounge one, because this one is not accessible for everybody. But kind of like the classic Eames chair, and it makes me think, okay, yeah, maybe it is time to kind of bring back this quality of life and thoughtfulness in the design. Same with, I don't know, like mid-century homes. Like, they were super thoughtful in the way people were living and all of the details. And I'm like, houses you look, on Zillow now to buy, they all look like shit. They're all cookie cutter. They are like completely soulless. They lack of everything. And I'm like, there must be a way, again, to just bring that quality back without having to, invest millions of dollars in making it happen. So,
yeah, I think you bring up a couple of really interesting points in time. When we really think about the landscape today, what the Eameses did with materials and democratizing good design it's aspirational, and it's something that I think we talk about a lot. Like, what is the next era of that, and are we in a moment where the technology that's available today, when married with sort of craft, gives us an opportunity to do something like that in this century? I think it's really interesting. There are so few pieces that don't come from the mid-century modern era that are considered iconic, or that people would instantly recognize if you're not in the architecture and design world. Like, it's been a really long time since products that sort of would fit into that category, in my mind, exist. And I truly believe that we have an opportunity to build something iconic that is going to have an impact this century on the way that products are built and the choices that people are making. That's our goal, right? And they are inspirational in that regard. I'd love to be sort of sitting here in 10 or 20 years going like, look, what Fyrn built was an iconic way of, a iconic product that's instantly recognizable, that stands for those types of things around, like, the choice that a consumer or an individual makes to live with something beautiful. They were able to do that because of the way that this system brought to life, a new class of products. And I think that the bones are there. Like, I think the people who are a part of this company and who have intersected with it know that this is unique, and that we have the opportunity to do that if we can keep bringing new aspects to the system forward. If we can start to expand beyond seating and bring the new products to life, and we can tell the story, and we can show people behind the scenes what is happening. Because the average consumer doesn't really go on factory tours and things, but when we bring architects, we had Gensler at the shop yesterday, or we bring, designers through who get to see all the behind the scenes stuff, that's the real magic. That's when the piece starts to really take on a gravity and a weight and a presence that's more than just the object itself, right? It's not just which of these should I choose, but how something is made and who's behind it and why it exists in the way that it does. That brings a richness to the thing, and it's a story that actually it makes you sort of have an emotional attachment to the object, and then that can be very powerful. So I hope we get to keep telling that story. I hope more and more people can sort of hear it. I hope that it has as much resonance to them as I think it does for me.
So I do want to pick up on the kind of thought that, Marina mentioned the Eames chair, and a lot of the other mid-century pieces are very iconic, and mid-century design, I guess you call it style, has kind of had it's had a very strong revival in the last maybe 5-10 years, super strong. I don't really know what my question is. I guess I'm wondering if you know or have an idea of what would make a piece of furniture created today reach that iconic level, or maybe not to quite the level of an Eames, but in that way. Is it because it has to do with a response in the largest sense to the context and the times, sort of like what we're talking about, that a lot of furniture that's mass produced now is of a certain quality or lack thereof, and what you guys are doing is sort of the opposite?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer this in sort of 3 parts, and I'll try to not be super long, but I think there's a few major factors that play here. One is the sort of commodification of mass furniture, right? And the groove that I was saying around that you were referencing around how things get made, and the idea is like you're going to the same factories, you're asking them to make products. Those products sort of like move down a path that, even if they're designed differently, at the end of the day, like a lot of it looks the same, is the same. Nobody's thinking like, I really want that West Elm chair or even that room and board chair, right? Like, it's just it's a place to shop, and they have a lot of choices for you, right? And those things are, they're uniquely designed, but within a very sort of narrow path that's not ultimately that unique in a lot of cases. I'm not saying there aren't unique pieces being built, but I think the way things are being built and the way that businesses are being built and the choices that are being made lead to a commodification of furniture that's not unique. So I think that's a factor. I also, at the same time, and in contrast to that, I think that it's never been easier for some individual, for an interior designer, for an architect, for someone who just has the curiosity, to be able to have something that they make be produced. And therefore you have a proliferation of actually like unique and interesting design in the way that you have a proliferation of access to music. It's not the era of the Beatles where we all are sort of paying attention to the next album that comes out and we know these are the handful of bands that are like globally known. Like, there's so much music being out there in the world, and there's so much design and opportunity to have a custom piece made, that because of that, our attention is not focused in on the new episode of Seinfeld that came out on Thursday. We're talking about these pretzels are making me thirsty, right? Like, there's this need for what's new. I want to see the new thing. I'm tired of what happened last week. It doesn't, and because of that, I think in general, a lot of people are not taking the time or the energy to deeply, deeply go down a path that requires a refinement and iteration of something that's so well crafted and made that it makes sense to be purchased over and over and over again. And it is iconic in its form, and it starts to represent something that means more than just a place to sit. So I think about that piece around, we're 10 plus years into a single product, basically a chair that we believe is extraordinary because it's had so much energy put into that single product, not just like, how do we move on to the next product or the next iteration, the next thing. And I think there's a third element, which is, in order for it to, I might even get to a fourth, but I think the third element is, how does it sort of get represented culturally and in the, and in the world? And a lot of parts of that ends up being about marketing. So if you have a huge company that owns the rights to the distribution of the Eames chair today, which you do, and their stories and the power of telling the story of the designers, then those are the things we're going to recognize. Those are the things we're going to see. Now, I think the Eameses were brilliant. I think that they, did so much, not just in the world of furniture, but in filmmaking and in shaping the world we live in. it's extraordinary, right? And I think it deserves to be brought up on a pedestal. But I think at the end of the day, like in today's world, where you have the proliferation of so many things, where you have the commodification of mass consumption in a level that, that ultimately doesn't create unique things at scale, in order to break through today, I think given all of that, there's a few things that have to happen, and these are, things that are intimate, into what we're trying to build. I think you need the furniture to be in places that are public, that are seen in the world, that are experienced in the world on a regular basis. I think you need to build something that is incredibly unique in its utility, that has like a reason to be chosen over and over again, that is solving problems in some way, shape, or form, whether those be not only environmentally, but have to be in the utility and the way that it's used. And it's lightweight, it moves around, it's easy to see why as a person at home, I'd want this thing. And then I think it's about sort of longevity. Like, is it unique enough in those other ways that it continues to be something? It has to be simplistic enough that it's not going to be trendy, right? One of the things about a lot of that, a lot of the things that are made is like, in order to catch someone's eye in design, it's got to be on trend. It's got to be at the moment. This is the thing. Like, our stuff, and I can't do this without relating it back to what we're doing, but it's deliberately simple. A chair should look like a chair. It should not go out of style. It should always fit into a number of different types of environments. And so I kind of ask this question of like, do you want to be buying the thing that has history and story and is iconic but is everywhere now, or do you want to be at the forefront of sort of choosing the next iconic thing? And is it possible today to have an iconic thing that will be looked back on, at 30, 40, 50, 60 years and go, that was impactful, that changed the way that people thought about design or making products, and therefore like it's worthy of continuing to be bought and placed in things that, in design that matters.
Yeah. You said there was a possible fourth point, or did you cover it within that spiel?
I think I covered it. That spiel was long, so I think I covered the main things.
But the idea of like passing down furniture from a generation to the next is a very interesting thing to think about. I mean, I don't know, like if you look back in time, like your parents probably inherited, furniture from your grandparents and so on and so on. So the family heirloom and tradition and memories on that chair just gets passed to the next one, right? It doesn't happen these days very much, because you're right, the things that we buy are not meant to last. So you don't get that kind of lineage.
Well, people want to pass down stuff to you, but it's like shitty, cheap stuff. I'm like, I don't want that.
Well, maybe if there's a fourth point that wasn't explicit, it's that, right? It's that, and this gets into an interesting, a little bit of an interesting groove, but like the quality has to be there to make it even, like we have so many options today for a thing that looks pretty nice on the surface and isn't even that cheap. But then ultimately I get a year or two or three into having it, and it's either a throwaway or it turned out, it actually is broken and I can't do anything about that, even if I wanted to keep it. And so I think that, that is something that, as a person buying something, it's incredibly hard to know, because the marketing's gotten so good, and because it is you don't get the opportunity to actually live with things long enough for someone to get a reputation that goes, oh, this is it, right? Because that's basically where mass production and consumption has taken us, and it's somewhat about like a demand for a cheap and convenient thing. It's a mentality that the consumer has either been bred to have or inherently wants. We need shifts. I don't know where the chicken or the egg is, but I think that you need to have those products be really well crafted to have an opportunity to survive. And then you said a part of this that's so important, and we're trying to figure out, how do you retain, that story? Like, that is kind of like not that long ago. You're right. Like, my mom has my grandparents and her great grandparents' stuff in some of her homes. And if you go to Ross's house, there's a story behind every piece of furniture. And we all know and feel that when there is that story, the object means so much more to us. And we covet that. We want it. Like, people want to be able to tell that story. But they've sort of make choices every day that don't allow for it. And, we in so many other parts of our life, we sort of like pay up, like you'll buy a very expensive dress and you might wear it a handful of times. You'll go to that incredible experience of a dinner, that's hundreds of dollars. But when it comes to $400 or $500 or $600 for a chair that might last you 100 years that you could pass to someone else and they could, always you fix, it's like, whoa, that seems like a lot.
I know.
Yeah.
Preaching to the choir.
But if you actually break it down to like how many hours you spend on that chair and how much that costs you, it's totally worth it. It's the same with, like our profession in designing homes. Like sometimes people just see the upfront price, but they don't think as an investment, or how does that price, reflects over a certain period of time.
Well, we see, not to go too much off into the tangent, but I think for what we do, there's a number of aspects. First is if the person's going to live in the home for a number of years, then that's a different type of home, right? But if people are going to be there for just a couple and they basically want to flip it, then that's different. But we also often find this strange situation where folks, they know that they're going to be at this place, they're going to raise their kids, they're going to be there for the next 20, 15 years or whatever it's going to be. And yet they're like just super concerned with resale value. I'm like, if you know you're going to be here for 15 years and you're in San Francisco or Los Angeles, the value is going to go up, don't worry about that. And you could almost do anything to this house and the value is going to go up. Don't make these strange decisions that don't fit how you live, first of all, and how your kids are going to live for this unknown faceless market person that's going to buy the house 20 years from now.
That's going to tear it down anyway.
But I think, tear it down anyway. Yeah, like that mailbox.
Yeah.
What you're saying resonates so much because I think, there's a few different things that really resonate. One is just like the immediate, I've never met a person who stretched to buy a home in San Francisco or LA and regretted it, right? Or to invest in that home. Like it's always been the best financial decision they've ever made for the most part. So that's ironic. But the more important thing that you're saying that really resonates is just this idea of like, there's a, when you go to Europe or places that have sort of, been cities that have been around longer than we have. There's an old olive orchard, olive and lemon farm in Sicily that my wife and I have taken the kids to. And that's actually Clea and I went. Clea went there before I'd been. We've been a handful of times. We've made friends with these two. It was a couple that were an architect and designer. It's called Casa Migliacca. And now the son is running it. And when you're in a place it's been in the same family for 400 years, the house is constantly, some of the things are original, but many of the things at the house are just over time being improved for the way that they live in that space to make the quality of life so much better. And you see the sort of stacking of generations improving a quality of life in a way that you live in a space. And ultimately, when you're in it, you just feel so comfortable and things are so easy. And it's suddenly like everything just sort of like makes sense. We don't do a lot of that here in America. We don't think on that time scale or improve on things. Some people do. And when you're in their spaces, you really feel it. The difference between sort of like, if you can afford it and if you invest in these things. And I think it's not always about affording, it's about, do you prioritize that in your life, the way that living in a space feels, do you think long-term about how you improve a space in little ways that ultimately stack up? That's really special. And I think that so often there's so much more short-term thinking versus that long-term thinking that really changes the quality of life and the way that you live and the way that you experience your space. I wish we were moving, I hope we're moving more towards more and more people thinking in that way. Because that would be wonderful, right? Like that's a nice feeling whenever you're experiencing it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not, and I do understand, of course, that for some folks, the price of whatever kind of architecture is out of their range. And for some folks, $500 for a chair might be just out of their range. And that's fine. But I guess the thing that's odd to me is that when people do have the money and the budget is there, the money's there, but they're just making decisions based on other criteria, which again have nothing to do with value or quality of life. Actually, forget the product. I mean, the product is about creating better value or better quality of life. It's an odd thing. I think also the other point you brought up about the observation that a lot of the furniture retail stores and companies have a wide variety of products that very quickly, kind of like at a quick glance or quick experience, look convincing and cool and flashy, and they hit the right trend wavelength, but there's nothing like of substance underneath them. Is also it's a really interesting observation, because I think it's one of the differences, generally speaking, between, I think, designers, creatives, and architects and all these kinds of craftspeople versus a lot of the general public who don't quite understand the difference between those two types of products, the difference in the quality, the longevity, the philosophical differences, all of those things. And it made me think also it's similar for us, in that for like a house, for example, people just want to kind of, they see something in a magazine, they like it, and they just make this for me, and I don't care how it's made, we can make it cheaply, just make something like that. And it's like the complete wrong ethos. It's like, that is not, first of all, what you're seeing in the magazine, or wherever else. So when you're driving down your neighborhood, let's say, it's not a great piece of architecture, so we shouldn't be trying to copy it. But you're building on this kind of like this marketing shell of a product based on another marketing shell of a product, and things just become, you get off into weird, strange land where nothing's like authentic or real anymore.
Yeah. And, I totally agree with that. I think, social media has a role in this.
Oh yeah.
Like, capitalism, marketing, like they're all sort of like playing into this path of things start to look a lot like very ubiquitous, right? Like, and it's about, it's not about, the lived experience or a really thoughtful choice. It tends to be about exactly what you said, like replication or surface.
Surface, right?
And surface, and that can be really disappointing. I mean, I think even in the cases of some of the more iconic design that's happening, there's a lot of choices being made in the way that stuff is made today versus the way it was originally, that it doesn't last the way that an original piece would. It's still super recognizable, but like we've kind of bastardized what was special about it in the first place, right? And so that's really frustrating, and I don't know what we can do about it, but I think conversations and consciousness around it, and just sort of, I think about food as an interesting proxy. Like, it wasn't that long ago that organic food was a crunchy hippie thing, and and now the origins of where food comes from and how it's made, and those choices are like much more prolific in conversation and in our lives and our experience and our availability, and so I think that it makes perfect sense, and maybe COVID is a catalyst for this, where we all were sort of like locked into our homes and having to think about it. Are we going to start to tune in a little more about the choices we make for the objects that we surround ourselves with, and where and how those are made, and where they come from, and what it means when I make a choice? Like, ultimately, it's almost like the ease, and when you're dealing with clients, I think it's different, because you're thinking about, I know that the same things exist, and you're explaining where they come into play, but especially with the objects, it's just so easy to click a button and have it show up on your doorstep, and to not think about anything else in between, right? And somehow we like disassociate the feeling we get when that thing doesn't live up to the expectations with the next time we click the button. And so I don't know what the path out of that is, but I think, early days of Fyrn, Ross and I had a lot of conversations of like, should we have like a thing where when they click the button, we ask like, are you sure you want to make this purchase? We have a used one over here you could buy, or have you thought about, literally we talked about that, and because like, I think that it almost would be beneficial, right? Like, and instead we kind of went the other way on like, look, we'll buy back any furniture that we make and put into the world forever, because then you can feel confident in that investment. You can know that it's sort of built to a standard that's different. But I don't know how we kind of shift the mentality. I think, and I'm not sure, but like my gut says that younger folks are tuning into some of these things. I
agree.
In a way that's more than what people my age have. And I hope that's true.
I did want to ask, and you kind of touched on it, because we covered, the kind of the business of the company, the making of the things, and then thirdly was the marketing. So kind of zooming back in the early 6 months period and the earlier days, did you guys look at other companies for sources of inspiration or models, or how did the marketing conversation go?
Yeah. There's like phases of this, I guess, that I would say, and I'll walk you through them. And, for the early days, I think, when you put Ross and I in a room, neither of us being marketing experts and not having a lot of dollars, I think our kind of like approach was, there were so many things we wanted to do that were hard to bring to life. And I think what we really didn't want to do was what everyone else was doing. But it's really an interesting question. It gets really hard. There's a desire by Ross and I early to sort of like over explain with lots of words and letters from us, or like, really detailed explanations for the choices that we're making and how it fits into the world. And I think it's asking a lot of people,
Yeah.
Especially today with attention spans, to tune into that, right? Like they're not going to. And this is with the sophistication of marketers, like the things that we're doing that I think are unique are being advertised and marketed as what everyone else is doing. And how could a consumer ever know the difference, right? Like, and I don't mean to be like, I think there's lots of companies doing lots of incredible things.
Sure.
But I think there's also a lot of companies who are like, that's the hot buzzword. This is sustainability. It's green. This is, American made, but sort of, like, I think,
Yeah.
They just put the stamp when it gets to the US, but it's made somewhere else.
365-day trial, but 40% restocking fee, it's like, it's, I guess what I'm saying is like, we took a number of paths, some of which were very sincere and authentic and sharing those stories. And I think that really resonates with a small number of people, or can matter. I don't think a lot of people ultimately make buying decisions on a lot of those factors. I think that it's something that makes them feel good after purchase or is an enhancement. But like at the end of the day, when it comes to furniture, in a lot of cases, I think people are choosing because of what it looks like, the design, does it fill the need? And then those other things are supportive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, we had sort of internally this notion that like our product does the selling. Like our goal is just how do we make it as easy as possible for people to touch, feel, experience the product. And so that if you're interested in buying chairs from us, we'll send one to you within a week. It'll show up. You can live with it. It doesn't have to be in perfect condition. There's no cost to this experience. And you can decide, do I have the right finishes? Is this the right chair for me? Like we use that kind of sort of like our marketing was just like get the chair in people's hands, get it into public spaces where they'll see it. And then, we got to a place where we sort of acknowledged that we need to be thinking about marketing, as much as any other company. We're going to still do it in our way, but like we started to think about like who can we bring in who actually does understand and do this professionally, and we've brought in some folks who I think are wonderful, and who really sort of forced us. There's a woman named Danielle who's our chief marketing officer, and a woman named Lauren who's our head of brand, who have really forced us to sort of get to the heart of what is truly unique, what is the thing that we want to be communicating, to folks and to the world, and how do we take ourselves out of this sort of cycle of let's try to over-explain things. There's a time and a place for it, like a conversation like this. But when it comes to sort of putting our stuff out into the world, like let's be true to what we have, which is a really beautiful and amazing product. Let's figure out how to succinctly talk about what's unique, and then, and then let's make sure that people are aware it exists. So let's go beyond our sort of home market, and let's make sure that that we're giving third parties, publications, editors, journalists, folks like yourselves, people who work in the architecture and design industry, an opportunity to experience the product and say what they think about it, because that's so much more powerful than what we're going to say.
Sure.
What we're going to say is obviously biased by our experience and what we're trying to do, but the most powerful marketing tends to be when the people in the world are using the product that matter and they're talking about it. And for the first time ever, we're sort of we're seeing we're really seeing that sort of like come to life, through the Chronicle, came, they wanted to talk about why this chair is, is showing up in all these places. And that started with a small inquiry, and it led to a front page Sunday article with, big spreads. And we were like, wow, that was awesome. That was fun. I find that the more that we invite people in and we peel back the layers, the more that the marketing is really just about exposure to the product. Whether we do that in a more refined way or whether we do that in a more crude way, like that's the most effective thing so far for us.
You should just start sprinkling chairs in the streets in random cities.
Like, what do they call it? Guerrilla advertising?
We've thought about it.
I'm sure. I think we do, myself in particular, empathize with the desire and the attempt to have a more longer format way of communicating the value of something. Hence the podcast. I have a difficult time being concise, and I totally get it. It's really difficult because I 100% agree that because of basically the internet, that it's very easy for every company to just use the same language, which are the buzzwords, to sound appealing, to have these stamps that we do X, Y, and Z things. And it's very challenging, therefore, for the folks who are actually doing those things to express that no, but really we are actually doing these things and they are not. Right. And here's a paragraph as to why that's the case, but no one's ever going to fucking read that paragraph. No way. Yeah. So like, I get it.
You will.
I will, yeah. But it's it is true that most people either don't have the time or the space, and you can't expect them to go through and digest all that. It's not their expertise or the area of expertise or hardcore interest necessarily.
Yeah, it's just really challenging. I think the other thing that I really appreciate about our team and the way that we think about it, like as like sort of the anti-marketing, is to try to be thinking, like we've always tried to be thinking very like sort of long term, right? Like treating the folks, our customers extraordinarily well and letting them be an advocate for us, like making sure that we care for our partners, the architects, the designers. We sort of bring this notion of hospitality to everything that we do. And I believe that brands are built with longevity and consistency and sort of honesty about what the company really is and the people behind it. I don't think you can sort of buy that or accelerate it. And I think we've seen a lot of these brands who've been sort of like, and huge amounts of venture funding have gone towards you all know about it, but then suddenly it sort of falls apart because at the end of the day, it was a lot of marketing dollars pushing someone to press a button and not actually building strong foundations through product and culture and care for the customers and the other folks that they intersect with. So I would not say that there weren't individuals inside those orgs who care, but I just think that like, the best marketing is to make an exceptional product and to continue to do so and take care of the people who use it and buy it. And over time, that will do its job for you. However, that doesn't solve the near-term challenge of how do you sell enough stuff to keep your team, your company alive. So it's a challenge.
It is funny because we through the show and other conversations, we talk with folks who are older and very successful, and of course the question is, how did you get to that point, and what are, I guess you'd say, even tips for success and this kind of stuff, right? And anytime we heard the answer of like, well, it just takes time, it takes 15 years and it'll work out. I'm like, bro, that's not helpful to like anyone that's below the age of 40 these days.
Shortcuts. Like, there is no shortcuts.
No, there aren't any shortcuts for sure. I'm not saying that there are, but
and that's what we're all doing right now. This is just the hard time we have to go through. There is light after that, and things are going to happen. I was actually wondering, so I'm very excited to see more product coming from your brand, right? Like I cannot wait to see like more stuff. But I was wondering are you guys still constantly fine-tuning and bettering the design of your current products? Or are you just like producing a bunch of ideas for new stuff to come until like it actually is possible?
Yeah, great question, and a hot topic inside Fyrn. No, it's honestly, so I don't think no matter what, we could ever stop Ross from iterating and improving the product. And I love it about him. And I also am like, it's really good. Let's pause on that. So I'll give you like the most recent change to the product, which most people wouldn't totally grok, is the fasteners, the screws that are involved in each chair have a little spacer and a screw, and they were two separate components. And it's actually really hard to responsibly source that kind of hardware. And we had a 2-year project where we created a custom screw that combines those two things into one screw, and is of a higher quality and domestically produced for us specifically with a better drive. And that's a change that like, it takes a bunch of steps and parts out of an assembly process for the end user. It creates a better connection and a stronger, piece of hardware. And no one would ever know it happened, but it did. And it actually does have a big experiential change to the way that, that product exists. Small things like that, or changes to the way that the packaging is produced to be a little more efficient or a little bit more protective. We're always doing that kind of stuff, and I don't imagine we'll ever stop. I think that we are constantly taking notes on where there are small ways you can make the product a little bit better, the current, seating a little better. With that said, most of our energy today is centered around those next products. And we are weeks away from sort of showing the world a series of cafe tables, which we think are going to be quite beautiful. We have a lounge chair that brings dimensionality, and that like it's the same metal and wood frames that you've come to know and love scaled up, but with some really nice cushioning that, brings this sort of softness and an opportunity to collaborate on fabrics and things that will bring to life a new sort of dimension to Fyrn. And there's lots of sort of long tail stuff too that's being worked on that'll come in the coming years. But those next two product families and the systems around them, we're not far off, and it's going to be really nice to start to show the world sort of some of our perspective on things that go beyond the seating, which I think we do incredibly well.
That's amazing. So this recording will definitely come out after the release, so we'll be sure to incorporate whatever links and whatnot. But very excited.
I can't wait.
Just as fans of what you guys do.
Thanks so much.
The last thing, a couple of things I was wondering is, so are most of your products still purchased and used in specifically the Bay Area, or is it throughout California, throughout the States?
Yeah, so we're domestically focused. It's just complex to start to do the international shipping and things. The Bay is our home market, right? Like I would say like here people do know about us. We're in so many public spots that like, whether they realize it or not, you're sitting on the furniture. We have a great reputation with the architecture and design community here, and we're in so many homes. I think the Bay is clearly, because of our origins, like it is where the majority of both recognition and business has come from to date. More and more, and I would say probably if we look at, total sales at this point, more sales are outside the Bay than in, but we're still very early in a lot of the other major markets. New York is starting to have bars and restaurants that are popping up. LA, Seattle, Chicago, Austin, Dallas. Those are the places that we see the most sort of, I'd say, commercial business starting to happen, and we are seeding that. Deliberately. Residentially, we're everywhere. We actually get a lot of business from rural markets and places that you wouldn't expect that are outside big cities. But yeah, we're residentially, the residential side of the business is bigger than the commercial side. The commercial side is where we get the most beautiful assets and pictures, but the residential business, we're sort of all over the country. And it's still more heavily, geared towards California because of the recognition, but more and more we're spreading that exposure in a serious way.
Do you think that was just through the design community becoming more exposed to it, architecture and designers, and then the word kind of spreads across, the country?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think if you go back to your question around like our marketing strategy or where we have the dollars to invest, or how we think about, the ability to grow, it's a lot of word of mouth and experience. And so, yeah, I think when we get that first public location in a market, more people go to that nice hot restaurant or whatever, are like, ooh, what's this? And then I think we get a lot of designers talking to designers. We get a lot of sisters and brothers and parents and kids who come in and go, what's that? And then we get a lot of sort of repeat family business that's word of mouth. Like word of mouth and experiencing the product tends to be our biggest driver. And so as we see more products sort of show up in any particular market, there's a little bit of a, I'll use a businessy word, flywheel that happens for us, right? That's just sort of organic discovery through the product existing. I think another, to tie this into one of your earlier questions, if there was a fourth thing in the how can you have an iconic product? It's got to be visually recognizable, right? It's so hard to differentiate. Well, our bracket is, that you see as part of our logo is both a patented part, but it's the most visually recognizable part of the furniture. You instantly can know that's a Fyrn piece. And so I think that is also helping to sort of fuel the oh, I've seen that somewhere, or I recognize that, or that's the piece that my uncle or my designer has. So yeah, I think the more presence we have in a place, the more likely it is that we see more business come from there.
The final question from me is, what is the most challenging part of your job? There's a list of 50 things probably, but
well, you said most. I'll try not to list 50 things. That feeling I referenced of never being able to do any one thing to the standard that I'd like to because of the constraints around resources and time and people. And that goes outside just work. I have 2 young kids and we're trying to build this business and it's in a challenging moment. And I think attention and the ability to feel like I've done that to the standard that feels right for me can be really, really hard. And where I care most about that is in the other people that are part of our organization and wanting to give them what they truly deserve, which is, your best and your ability to support what they're trying to do and build. So the lack of time and resources, particularly in this moment, leads me to this repeated feeling of ooh, I want that to be at a higher standard and I want to give more to my team. And I find that to be something I stay up at night thinking about. I think that related to that is you get into these things with this ideal about what you want to build and the culture you want to have and how to make a company everything that isn't a lot of the companies that I was involved in sort of turning around when they were mismanaged or whatever. I learned a lot of those lessons. But then the practical realities of every day lead you to a place that you just see how hard it is to always to not get pushed down this funnel, right? Of
right.
Of what everything ends up looking like. And so just continuing to hold ourselves accountable and to that standard is really, really challenging. And being the best leader you can be for your team every day, is so important. I think that, those are the places that I sort of spend my time at night thinking about how to get more resources that make it possible to live up to those standards that you'd like to have for your team in the world.
Well, I have no doubt somehow that you are a very effective leader and that you guys are very much on the way or already doing it.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
My last question is the opposite. What is your favorite thing about what you do?
Yeah, it's related. I think getting to build something in the world with these people that we can be proud of is really special. And Fyrn has become, because of where it's shown up in the world, has become a portal for me to be exposed and to build relationships with people and creatives that I didn't have necessarily the exposure to in my old life. And it starts to open these doors. it opens doors to me now really being an integral part of the world of food in San Francisco. I have tons of friends now who are chefs and operators of some of the best places, and that's a world that I loved and admired and always wanted to be closer to. My brother was a chef. My family is obsessed with cooking and food, and it's been that way for generations. Like, I'm now having real relationships with them and able to provide something that makes the experience for their customers and their restaurants better. And that's amazing. It's a portal into the art world and the design world, where my wife is a very successful artist, but like, I was there as her partner, and now I'm sort of there as someone who's intersecting and interfacing with a lot of those folks. And I love that, because I think that, art and culture and design are things that sort of bring, they bring happiness and into my life. And so the furniture being a portal towards relationships and all these creative fields, and the opportunity to work with the people we are to build something that we can be proud of and that will hopefully last and be an objects that carry those stories from me to my kids to their kids. When I see a Fyrn chair in the world, in a place, it sort of just like warms my heart to know that like that is the product of so many good people's work to build it, the years that went into conceiving of this system, and that it's gonna be there whether we are or not. It's gonna be there in the world, doing the thing that it does, which is sort of being a chair to sit on for a long time to come. So I know that's a few different things, but I think just sort of like all of that is the summation of getting to be a part of crafting something that exists in the world and that influences and touches lots of people, and that brings more dimensionality to my life. It's just special. It's just a really special opportunity.
That's awesome.
I love that.
Okay, I'm going to quit my job and come work for you guys.
Whoa.
Dave, thank you so much for taking the time. I know obviously you're incredibly busy. This was a fantastic conversation, I think, and we appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you, and I've really enjoyed it. It's just nice I'd love to get to see you in person sometime, and it's just nice to come on and spend the morning chatting with good folks. So thanks.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button and liking and commenting on our videos.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail. If you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion, feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.